Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Paris and good afternoon to those of you tuning in from Southeast Asia. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this SIEW Thinktank Roundtable, which is hosted by the IEA. We have a fantastic program for you today that will examine the importance of buildings and cooling in Southeast Asia and opportunities for economic recovery. My name is Kieran Clark. I'm the IEA Southeast Asia Program Manager. I'm pleased to report that the IEA's collaboration with Southeast Asia is growing in leaps and bounds. A focus of ours that we think is befitting of the region's importance to the global economy and to the world of energy. 3 countries from this critical region have become members of the IEA family, namely Indonesia, Thailand, and of course, Singapore. And we have large bilateral work programs with each of these. You may have seen just this week that with the government of Singapore, we hosted the 2nd Global Ministerial Conference on System Integration of Renewables, which brought together more than 30 ministers, CEOs, and other thought leaders from Europe, Asia, and Southeast Asia in particular, to discuss how governments and the private sector can promote cleaner, more secure, more resilient power systems through effective renewables integration. The IEA is also very active at the regional level. Recently, the IEA was named a strategic partner to ASEAN by ASEAN Ministers of Energy. And we are helping to push forward regional energy priorities through our work on energy efficiency, which I'll come to in a minute, on regional power trade, energy investments, etc. And I'm very happy to see that our good friend Pak Nuki from ASEAN Center for Energy will be giving the keynote address in a few minutes. Today with UNEP and specifically UNEP's Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction Secretariat, we are launching our work on the regional roadmap for buildings and construction in Asia. This was an extensive piece of work focusing in particular on China, India, and of course Southeast Asia. And indeed, building on this Asia roadmap that we'll discuss, as well as the IEA's ASEAN Future of Cooling report, I'm happy to report that the IEA is kicking off a new initiative working with our ASEAN partners, with ASEAN member states, to develop a detailed roadmap for the buildings and construction sector in Southeast Asia, including a roadmap for space cooling in the region. So this road mapping process aims to assist ASEAN member states to develop and implement strategies, plans, policies, programs to reduce energy demand in the building and construction sector, with a particular focus on the role that energy efficiency in these sectors can play in terms of economic stimulus. So at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Martina Otto, head of the Cities Unit and the GlobalABC Secretariat at UNEP, who will be moderating the roundtable today. Martina leads UN Environment's work on cities and has worked closely with ION on the GlobalABC road mapping series, which includes the roadmap that I mentioned on Asia, but also on Africa and Latin America. Martina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kieran. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome also from my side to this session that highlights the importance of buildings and cooling sectors in the Southeast Asia region and the opportunities for economic recovery, as well as the launch of the regional roadmap for Asia. I'll be first presenting a few key factoids about the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, who we are, and if we can move to the next slide, please. And the next one. And the next one, please. Thank you. Okay, and here you see our objective is to accelerate the pace and the scale of action towards a zero-emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction sector, with a focus on increasing the level of ambition to harness the sector's potential to meet the Paris Agreement. We were created at the Climate COP21, and we've now grown to over 140 members globally, gathering national and local governments, private sector, intergovernmental organizations and think tanks, as well as key initiatives implementing projects in the buildings and construction space. Our value added to other networks in this space is bringing together the full breadth of actors to spur radical cooperation across the value chain and connecting to international processes, such as the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, be it through the technical experts meetings on mitigation that we've just held, or the regional climate weeks where we always represented, or the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action, where we lead the development of the buildings pathway towards decarbonisation. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so that's the snapshot of the roadmaps. Today we're launching our newest product, the Roadmap for Asia, but it is actually part of a series of regional roadmaps, and Kieran said that already, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and it comes after a global roadmap. The intent is to provide a framework and a process to drive the needed decarbonisation of the sector. And if you go to the next slide, please. The series has been developed in a consultative process in which over 700 stakeholders globally did engage. And we will introduce it shortly in detail, but so much already now, it provides a comprehensive set of aspirational targets, timelines, and key actions adapted to the regional context with a short-term, medium-term, and longer-term time horizon. And as such, it will inform as well the Race to Zero pathways that are already mentioned earlier of the high-level champions, climate champions within the context of the COP26, and it's actually intended to strengthen the nationally determined contributions as well. As we all know, they're due for review. And based on these regional roadmaps and via national alliances that do bring together the different constituencies in a process of co-creation in a given country, we are working with partners to build national roadmaps. And let me cite here, and actually, Kieran mentioned the regional one. There's another regional, sub-regional one that is underway, and that's for the sorry, it's very early in the morning. The Arabic region, sorry. So let me cite here the Franco-German funded program on energy efficiency in buildings, the Zero Carbon Buildings Project, a global environment facility funded program for which UNEP is the implementing agency, and the World Resources Institute, the executing agency. And then there's also cooperation between UNEP and the UN Development Program under their Climate Promise, that is actually helping a whole host of countries wishing to enhance their climate pledges. And in the region, efforts have started, for example, in Vietnam and Cambodia. The roadmaps are a GlobalABC flagship product, but they're not the only one. And if we move to the next slide, please. We also have tools such as a guide for integrating buildings measures into the nationally determined contributions. And we also issue an annual global status report, which gives a snapshot of the developments in the sector. And if we move to the next slide, please. It shows a couple of key snippets of this global status report. Could just go to the next slide. Thank you. The building sector is the sleeping giant if it comes to climate action, with its responsibility of 39% of GHG emissions. That shows the size of the importance. While progress is made, particularly in the buildings operations, they're outpaced by a set of trends such as the increase in floor space and also the cooling demand, which is steeply on the rise. The second highlight that I wanted to give is that 136 parties have referenced action related to the buildings and construction sector in their NDCs, yet few have specific policy measures embedded, and even fewer do describe targets to move to the carbon neutral or net zero energy building performance. So that means we have quite a big percentage of 2050s buildings that would not be covered by those measures. And thirdly, in 2019, almost 2/3 of countries lacked mandatory building energy codes. meaning that more than 5 billion square meters were built last year without mandatory performance requirements. And that really underlines the urgency of stepping up our actions to realize the sector's potential and make it future-proof. And needless to say that the present COVID-19 pandemic has shed further light on the importance of the sector, both in terms of vulnerability of those living in adequate housing conditions and the need to be better prepared for all kinds of crises. And we've just been reminded how important our buildings, particularly our homes, are, as half the world's living under some form of restriction. We just got a new set of restrictions in Paris, and our apartments have really been transformed into offices and schools. And the sector is really important, and that's why the title gave it away as well, how important it is for the recovery, the economic recovery, and the related packages where we need to see the sector reflected. And obviously we all know how important it is for the global economy, and the 10% of the total global workforce that is working in this sector. And particularly green renovation has the potential to do a bit more on this, to create more local jobs than many other sectors. And obviously as well, the investments in energy efficiency do pay back in energy savings. So in sum, while our economies have been down, the climate crisis has not stopped, and therefore our recovery has to be green, and the buildings and construction sector has to be a part of this. So with these remarks, let us go into the agenda. And it does have two parts. I think we can take away the presentation now. It has two parts. For the first, I'll have a keynote address by Dr. Nuki Agaya Utama, the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Energy, followed by a presentation of the key findings of the Asia Roadmap by Maxine Jordan from the International Energy Agency, and then a panel discussion to zoom in on how the roadmap can support meaningful climate action in Asia, followed by question and answers. And with that, I have the pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. As I said, Dr. Nuki Agaya Utama. He has a background as an energy scenario planner, and before becoming the Executive Director of the ASEAN Center for Energy, he held senior positions in the private sector and has had experience also with the UN, the development and the environment programs. So we'll be showing you the pre-recorded message. Thank you. If you could bring that on. Cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant and good morning to all of you. On behalf of the ASEAN Center for Energy, I would like to express my appreciation and convey my gratitude to Singapore Energy Market Authority as the organizers of the Singapore International Energy Week, and also to the International Energy Agency for conducting this roundtable session on the importance of the buildings and cooling sectors in Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, the ASEAN region is the third fastest growing economy in Asia. Therefore, along with the economic growth, the energy demand has increased by 70% since year 2000, and it is expected to continue to grow to meet economic growth in the region. Almost 40% energy consumed in building sectors. And this fast-growing demand for building in the region will create huge opportunity in terms of efficiency. And the energy efficiency itself viewed as the world's first fuel and categorizing as the low-hanging fruits, since it is cheapest and easiest way to reduce energy consumption. The energy efficiency is regarded as one of the vital strategies for energy transition to support the region's sustainable development. By improving energy efficiency, it is expected that the purposes of energy saving and a reduction in total energy use can be achieved in a cost-effective way, which of course increases regional energy security and increases its regional competitiveness while maintaining comfort. Ladies and gentlemen, UNEP U4E initiative estimates that by 2040, the ASEAN stocks of cooling appliances, namely room air conditioners and residential refrigerators, will be almost triple in comparison to 2020. This will cause the electricity consumption from air conditioners to more than double, while the residential refrigerators is expected to increase by over 80%. The initiative found that there are annual saving potentials at more than 140 terawatt hours and 17 terawatt hours of electricity consumption by 2040 from the transition to energy efficient air conditioners and residential refrigerators, respectively. Therefore, ASEAN will deepen efforts to promote policies that will encourage the deployment of more efficient cooling products, which are becoming less expensive to buy, cheaper to power, and potentially manufactured within ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN has implemented various EE&C programs which have been directed toward increasing EE in 4 priority sectors, including residential, commercial buildings, industry, and transportation. These programs have successfully raised awareness and enabled the EE&C market, which has resulted in energy intensity reduction. Moreover, to improve the EE in the AMS and on a regional level, the AMS have set national EE target and an aspirational regional EE target. The EE&C programs and aspirational regional EE target are stated in the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, or APEC. APEC is a series of guiding policy documents that aims to promote multilateral energy cooperation and integration to attain the goals of the ASEAN Economic Community, and it serves as the platform for deeper cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, currently we are in the end of APEC Phase 1, where several accomplishments were achieved during the APEC, such as promotion and establishment of maps for home appliances through the endorsements of the Regional Policy Roadmap on harmonization of maps for air conditioners. The 37 ASEAN Ministers on Energy meeting endorsed the guideline for the integration of energy efficiency into the ASEAN Electrical and Electronic Equipment Mutual Recognition Agreement. ACE joined the Cool Coalition, an initiative of UNEP U4E, which aimed to facilitate knowledge exchange, advocacy, and joint action towards a rapid global transition, and also conducted the annual ASEAN EE&C Awards to promote awareness in reducing energy intensity. The energy conservation workshop under AJEP program capacity building was conducted to enhance understanding on zero energy building and green building codes. And also, ACE published the study on mapping of green building codes and building energy efficiency in ASEAN towards guidelines on ASEAN green building codes. And also conducted the inaugural Singapore IEA training program in green buildings. Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN is currently developing the APEC Phase 2. And under the APEC Phase 2, ASEAN will keep the original theme of the APEC 2016-2025, which is enhancing energy connectivity and market integration in ASEAN to achieve energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. And during the Special Summit 2020, the meeting agreed to add the new sub-theme, which is accelerating energy transition and strengthening resilience through greater innovation and cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Program under the APEC Phase 2 will accelerate energy transition efforts by setting a more aggressive energy intensity reduction target of 32% by 2025, based on 2005 level, and encourage further energy efficiency and conservation efforts. To achieve this target, ASEAN will have the strategies to expand, harmonize, and promote energy efficiency standards, enabling on energy-related products, including cooling technologies such as air conditioners, and also strengthen sustainability on energy efficiency in buildings. These strategies show that efficient building and cooling is very important matters in ASEAN to accelerate energy transition and strengthen energy resiliency. Ladies and gentlemen, under the APEC Phase 2, ASEAN will develop the Sustainable E-Building Roadmap and Sustainable Cooling Roadmap. The two roadmaps aim to provide policy recommendation as a pathway to efficient, resilient, and low-emission buildings. To complement these efforts, the AMS will conduct a series of information sharing that will aim to enhance the capacity of the AMS to analyze and implement policies and incentives on sustainable EE in buildings toward net zero energy consumption building. Also building energy codes and as well as the building envelope system. The opportunities in smart building sector will be further explored to advance smart cities in ASEAN. Moreover, to achieve high impact energy efficiency improvement and energy saving, the AMS will examine the benefit of new technologies, market mechanism, and policy support to serve as basis in forging cooperation amongst EE stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, we wish that we can continue to strengthen our capacity and cooperation in the development of energy efficiency and conservation. Lastly, we wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you for your kind attention.
We thank Dr. Nyuki Agaya-Utama for his remarks, highlighting the importance of energy efficiency improvements in the region and all the measures that are already underway. And I think it's important to highlight the topic of cooling and what can be done both in terms of the appliances and the minimum energy performance standards for the appliances, all the way to where they are being used, and that is the buildings, and thereby helping to avoid cooling demand to skyrocket in the first place. With that, we will now hear the key findings of the Asia Roadmap from Maxine Jordan. She's an energy efficiency policy analyst at the International Energy Agency, where she leads the energy efficiency in buildings and coolings work with the IEA's Energy Efficiency in Emerging Economies program. At the IEA, Maxine has also led the development of the GlobalABC regional roadmaps for buildings and construction for Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And with that, I hand over the floor to Maxine.
Thank you very much, Martina, and thank you to our organizers for this event, for hosting us. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm very pleased to be here today to be able to share the fact that the full series of the regional roadmaps are now online. So as you've heard, we developed a series of GlobalABC roadmaps, so 3 regional roadmaps and a global roadmap, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we're happy to be here today to be launching the Asia roadmap, and I'll be telling you a little bit about what we found and how to navigate this document. And before I start, I'd like to kindly remind you to fill in the polls that we've set up for you. So these will serve as a basis for our conversation later on in this session. So you should see the polls to the right-hand side of the screen through which you're seeing the session on the web page. By clicking on polls, you'll see there's a chat function, a function for questions, and a function for polls, and you'll see 5 questions that we've prepared for you. So next slide, please. And first of all, I'd like to thank our project partners. So the IEA developed this roadmap in collaboration with the GlobalABC and the UN Environment Programme. And next slide, please. With the support also from the World Resources Institute and the World Green Building Council. We also held a Singapore, a training program for green buildings in Singapore last year, which served as a really crucial moment to be able to collect information and discuss the roadmap with a series of building experts from the region. So we thank the Energy Market Authority of Singapore for that. And we also thank our funders for this project, so the governments of France, of Germany and Switzerland, and the other funders of the IEA's Clean Energy Transitions Programme. And thank you, of course, to all of the stakeholders who contributed. As we saw, there were over 700 stakeholders in total participated into this process, which really makes these documents so valuable. Next slide, please. So Martina touched on this. This is data from the Global Status Report. But the reason why we're looking at the buildings sector is because buildings and their construction account for a huge part of today's global emissions of carbon dioxide. So almost 40% of energy and almost 40% of total emissions. So it's a huge, responsible for a huge share of our emissions, but with that huge share also comes much potential for reduction. So next slide, please. So if we look at the emission savings potential of the building sector in ASEAN, India, and China combined, this is a figure from the IEA's World Energy Outlook analysis, and shows us that under the policies that have been stated so far, so the stated policy scenario, total emissions in the region would increase by about 1/3 by 2040. But with increased ambition on energy efficiency and renewable energy deployment, total emissions from the sector could actually be reduced by 2/3 of what they are today. All of this while still ensuring universal access to clean cooking and to electricity, supporting continued growth in GDP and floor area and access to energy services. Next slide, please. So if we look a little bit at what this scenario would look like, so this is the SDS, the Sustainable Development Scenario, we see that this would be supported by fuel mix transitioning from coal to increasing amounts of renewables, so PV, wind, and hydro in the region. And this would support a growth in electricity consumption in buildings, all while maintaining continued growth in per capita electricity consumption and increase in floor area. Next slide, please. And as well as being a crucial sector for reducing emissions, buildings are also vectors for achieving several other important benefits. So for example, providing more thermally comfortable environments, which are conducive to better well-being and higher productivity, more affordable and accessible energy services, resilience to climate events, more livable and equitable cities, and increased resource efficiency of materials. So the building sector is really where we can unlock all of these different benefits. And buildings will also be key in interfacing with an increasingly variable renewable power system. They'll increasingly need to provide flexibility. So, and also, as is particularly important in current times, the buildings and construction sector is a huge employer, as Martina mentioned, and holds significant potential for stimulating economic recovery, and even more so if this recovery is a green one. So we'll be discussing that in a little bit more detail later on. Next slide, please. So in order to understand how to unlock these benefits and develop a common vision for how to work across this large value chain towards achieving net zero carbon buildings, we've been working with the GlobalABC to develop these roadmaps. And in total, we engage with about 700 stakeholders across the 3 regions to build out timelines for each of 8 key themes. So spanning urban planning, new buildings, existing buildings, building operations, appliances and systems, materials, resilience, and clean energy. So to really capture all of the different facets of buildings, of the way that buildings impact on energy consumption. And for each of these themes, we looked at what is the current status and what is the vision to 2020 and setting milestones for the short, mid, and long term. And what we found overall was that overall there is ambition to strive towards net zero carbon buildings by 2050. And there are many excellent examples from across the regions of effective policies across all of these different topics. We also uncovered the wide range of multiple benefits that motivate different stakeholders and the wide range of stakeholders that there are. But we also saw that there's a strong need for increased integration and coordination across disciplines and across different levels of government. And there's also a need for more mandatory regulatory policies and more data to create baselines from which to develop more targeted policies. We also found that building materials and resilience stood out as topics most in need of data and information. And this was across the 3 regions that we looked at. Next slide, please. So the way that we developed these roadmaps was starting from a 2016 version of a global roadmap. And then that's when we started the process to regionalize these. So starting with Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And the methodology was to develop a survey from which to collect information from a wide range of stakeholders in the building sector, to collect information on current status of good policy examples, performance of technology. We also hosted a series of online workshops and some in-person events like the Singapore training for green buildings that I mentioned earlier. We also held a regional roundtable in Bangkok and a meeting with several stakeholders in New Delhi in India. And through this network of stakeholders, we also engaged with them to get feedback on our drafts. So we had several versions and received feedback on the timelines and the measures proposed. And so for each of these 8 themes, we looked at, the structure was similar. So we looked at regional trends on that theme, summarized the key actions, identified the key stakeholders, and then identified policy timelines and regional examples. So what are the key policies, and what are the short, medium, and long-term targets for those policies? And the same thing for technology. And both of these complemented with examples from the region of best practice of good programs. We also identified finance, capacity building measures to support those, and then identified the specific multiple benefits that could be achieved from those themes. Next slide, please. So I'm quickly going to talk you through an example. So I'll show you new buildings. And it's a big document with 8 themes. You can go to the next slide, please. So I won't go through it in too much detail, but I just want to give a taste of what kind of information you might find in there. So for example, with new buildings, the trends include the projected growth in floor area. What are the key drivers for that, for the growth in energy consumption? So growth in per capita energy consumption, of course, increasing demand for cooling, the lack of mandatory codes, challenges of implementation of building codes, and also the high participation of the informal sector. So these were some of the key trends and challenges for new buildings. And summarizing the key actions, we really are looking at developing a strategy to be able to decarbonize as a specific strategy developed for a particular region, sub-region, country. Using codes and labeling as a tool for design and for policy implementation. Also developing tools for efficient and passive design, so simple tools to help designers roll out designs more easily. And of course, awareness and information. Next slide, please. These are examples of the timelines that I mentioned. So on the left, we have the policy timeline. So the types of policies that we mentioned, that we talk about in new buildings, include building energy codes, but also the aspect of compliance with building energy codes, participation of the informal sector, building labeling of building components, building passports, life cycle analysis, and incentives. So these were the priority policies that are key to reaching net zero carbon buildings. And you'll see in bold, there are 2 sets of targets. In bold is the target for the region, and below that is an aspirational target. So recognizing that regions have diversity in terms of some cities being more advanced than others, some countries being more able to deploy certain policies than others. So we have this sort of 2-tier normal and aspirational target there to show these different pathways. We also identified for each of these topics where there was a lack of information to be able to set a target, or a lack of consensus around what the stakeholders thought would be an adequate target. So these are the ones shown in orange, and in red are where we found a lack of, we called it an ambition gap, where stakeholders did not think that, for example, carrying out life cycle analysis was going to become mainstream by 2050, when it's actually a tool, a really important tool to enable better design decisions. So that's the sort of model that's used across the 8 themes. In terms of technology, we looked at for the performance of building envelope, the inclusion of passive design measures, external shading, reflective surface finishes, insulation, performance of windows, daylighting, and design tools. So sorry for going so quickly, but just want to give you a taste of what's in there. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we also collated examples of programs and policies that we found across the region to showcase some of the really great initiatives that are already underway. So under the new buildings chapter, we have some examples from India, from China, from Malaysia, from Korea, and from Singapore, with some links for more information. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we also, for each of the sections, we have a subsection on finance, capacity building and multiple benefits. So identifying what are the most relevant financial mechanisms that can be used to deploy the measures that have been identified, and looking at what are the capacity building priorities and categorizing them between training that's required within government, training of professionals, training of financial sector and developers, general awareness, and training of product material manufacturers. And then identifying what are the relevant multiple benefits of that sector to be able to use as evidence to start implementing these policies. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to talk you through the highlights of the other sections to describe what sorts of policies are discussed there. So within urban planning, for example, we know that Asia Pacific is home to many of the largest cities on Earth and to the large populations exposed to extreme weather events and climate. Therefore, cities are crucial to reducing the impacts of and adapting to climate change. The types of measures discussed in this chapter to overcome these specific challenges include location efficiency, transit-oriented design, mitigation of urban heat island effect, data collection, and digital tools. But the key challenge was often related to political will and to a lack of institutional coordination, both vertically and horizontally across different disciplines, and the creation of integrated urban policies that could be implemented within the resource constraints of municipal bodies. Therefore, data collection, the creation of compelling narratives and evidence-based training and tools were key measures that were identified here to support institutional alignment and coordination at all levels and to support implementation. New buildings I've already talked you through. So existing buildings, while the construction rate is much higher with the rate of renovation, while the construction growth is much higher than the rate of renovation in existing buildings, there's still a lot of potential there. So here we discuss measures to increase the rate and depth of building renovation. Operations was an area where strong data was critical in being able to identify the most effective strategies for different types of buildings. So the measures that we discuss here are how to increase the rate of energy audits, benchmarking, accelerate the adoption of energy management systems and controls and digitalization. Next slide, please. In terms of appliances and systems, we talk about setting regularly updated, robust minimum performance standards, combined with comparative informative labeling to facilitate consumer choice and the implementation of incentives and procurement policies to boost the efficiency of the entire market and increase access to these appliances. This was an area where regional collaboration for standard and testing harmonization was highlighted as being very effective, as is already the case in the region with the harmonization of AC performance standards. In materials, we're looking at embodied carbon, improving production methods for construction, but also identifying and developing low carbon alternative materials and also construction techniques. Here there was the lack of data was quite strong to be able to identify specific measures. So focus is particularly required on information disclosure and tools to be able to build up this database and enable life cycle decisions to be taken. Resilience was about adapting cities and buildings to the adverse effects of climate change. And the key measures here were about risk mapping and monitoring, development of integrated resilience strategies, and the development of preventative measures to water and extreme heat. And finally, clean energy is how we're actually going to be able to get to net zero carbon. So this section looks at how to expand access to energy and how to decarbonize it. As we saw in the slides earlier, growth in electricity generation will be dominated by solar PV, wind and hydro. And clean energy combined with energy efficiency is really how we're going to, of course, the only way to get to net zero carbon buildings across their whole life cycle. So the measures, some of the key enabling measures here are around regulatory frameworks and subsidy reforms, requirements for renewable integration readiness, and renewable integration systems in building codes, for example. Next slide, please. So some of the, okay, sorry. So I just wanted to pause here and acknowledge the fact that this work was undertaken before the COVID pandemic. So just wanted to acknowledge that and explore what that means. And so in fact, public health crisis, economic crisis has actually only strengthened the reason why efficient and healthy buildings are so important, as Martina's put so well earlier, and how valuable the multiple benefits that we saw earlier really are. So the IEA and the International Monetary Fund worked on a report this year called the Sustainable Recovery Report, in which different measures were analysed for their contributions to a green economic recovery. And buildings efficiency consistently came out on top for many reasons. The jobs that are created or that are used are local. Measures are often very labour intensive. They can be deployed quickly, and they support the improvement of homes and critical infrastructure such as schools and hospitals. So here we see a snapshot of that analysis showing the amount of jobs created per capital dollars of per $1 million of capital investment. And we see that buildings efficiency retrofit and efficiency in new buildings comes out on top. So we think that this is an opportune moment, of course, to boost investment in buildings efficiency and clean energy. And we're looking forward to discussing this later with you in the panel, in the discussion, and through the polls. So next slide, please. And next slide again. Thanks. So we really hope that this process and these documents of the regional roadmaps will spark regional dialogue and collaboration across these regions, inspire concrete actions and national strategies for decarbonisation and economic recovery, in keeping in mind that these measures are in line with the sort of the design features of stimulus measures that are being devised at the moment. And we also hope that they'll highlight the need to fill the critical information and ambition gaps that have been identified in those documents. So you can click next. And so the immediate next steps for the IEA, we've already started on a roadmap for mainstreaming energy efficiency in residential buildings in India. And we're also, of course, here today to discuss the ASEAN roadmap for buildings and construction and the ASEAN roadmap for space cooling. And this is in complement to the other initiatives that Martina has mentioned in Cambodia and in Vietnam. So I'll stop there and look forward to, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxine. So please all hold your questions. I know it's a whole lot of things that have been highlighted here. It's a very rich document and can only encourage you to have a closer look. We'll get into more details, but now we will hear the regional perspectives, and we will have Mr. Noel Chin talking about the Singaporean experience, and Mrs. Kim Toa, who will bring us a perspective from Vietnam. And Noel Chin is the principal manager at the Built Environment Research and Innovation Institute of the Buildings and Construction Authority of Singapore. And here he oversees the Green Buildings Innovation Cluster program, an interesting program to help realize a push for super low energy buildings in Singapore. So the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you very much, Martina. Good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us. My presentation today will be an introduction of the Super Low Energy Program and how the Green Buildings Innovation Cluster Program was designed to help Singapore in the push for super low energy buildings. Next, this is the outline of my presentation. Next, and we will begin with a quick overview of the challenges and opportunities in Singapore for SLE. Next. Buildings, both residential and non-residential, account for about a third of our electricity consumption in Singapore, and is a very significant contributor of carbon emissions. One of the key reasons for this is, given our hot and humid climate, we foresee a continued need for cooling for our buildings. The challenge we face is how we best provide cooling in the most energy efficient manner to curb these emissions. In addition, we have been exploring renewable energy to offset the energy consumption. However, due to our geographical location with no wind and no hydropower and lack of access to resources such as geothermal energy and shortage of land, Singapore has earned the prestigious label of being renewable disadvantaged. The only renewable energy that is feasible is solar, but it also has its challenges with a high rise and high density urbanized tropical environment, resulting in competing use of limited roof spaces, such as M&E services and roof gardens. In addition, we experience high cloud cover throughout the whole year, resulting in intermittency in solar generation, thus making our renewable energy options very limited. Right. It is also projected that solar would account for about 2 gigawatt of renewable energy generation by 2030, but as pointed out by Minister during the opening of SIEW, that we will bring forward our target of 1.5 gigawatt by 2025 by leveraging on the public sector taking the lead, tapping on roof spaces of public sector buildings. Next. There's a silver lining though. In recent years, we've seen a rise in zero energy building movement globally, with greater push to address climate change, either due to countries increasingly adopting the sustainability agenda or the economic opportunities for rapid advancements of technologies. There's also a call for new buildings to be operated at net zero carbon from 2030 onwards, extending to 100% of all buildings by 2050, as announced by the World Green Building Council. Next. So what can we do to overcome these challenges? Next. Focus on greater building energy efficiency. So back in 2018, the Super Low Energy Program was launched by Minister Lawrence Wong at the International Built Environment Week. This is part of the Building and Construction Authority's continued efforts in green building development since the launch of our Green Mark scheme in 2005. He outlined the ambition of pushing building energy efficiency towards 60% from 2005 levels by 2030. To achieve this, 3 key activities were highlighted as instrumental to the success of Super Low Energy Challenge, namely the SLE Technology Roadmap, Green Mark for Super Low Energy, and the raising of industry capabilities and awareness. I'll go through a bit more about all of these initiatives in details in the next couple of slides. Next. But before I do so, let me explain what Super Low Energy is. Using Green Mark as a reference, Green Mark is a performance rating tool on the environmental sustainability of a building and has a minimum energy efficiency that has to be met, which is code compliant. For building owners or developers who are more ambitious, they would strive to achieve greater energy efficiency or savings and be certified under Green Mark Platinum, which represents a 50% savings from the baseline. For Green Mark Super Low Energy, it requires an even more stringent energy savings of 60%. Singapore is even exploring the possibility of achieving 80% energy savings through R&I, which will support innovative technological development and demonstration. The end goal is to make SLE both technically feasible and economically viable for mainstream adoption by 2030. Next. To help us achieve SLE, BCA in collaboration with the industry and academia developed the Super Low Energy Technology Roadmap. It outlines the broad strategies to help the industry to design and develop cost-effective SLE buildings. The roadmap identifies a range of technologies. When put together, will be able to achieve SLE. The technologies are grouped into 4 broad areas, namely passive strategies, active strategies, smart energy management, and renewable energy, where more than 60 technologies have been identified, some of which will still need to be developed through R&D. Next. The other strategy is to drive large-scale adoption via the Green Mark scheme. This serves as both a recognition of the developers or building owners' efforts and also for greater deployment of technologies, which is essential to scale up adoption. The Green Mark scheme, coupled with the green building policies and incentives schemes, have been instrumental in stimulating the growth of green buildings in Singapore, with 42% of our gross floor area green, and with a target of achieving 80% by 2030. By adding the SLE component, it would emphasize the commitment of the developer and building owners to strive for greater energy efficiency. To date, we have certified 41 Green Mark SLE buildings, which includes new and existing buildings with 14 ongoing SLE projects. Next. Various seminars and workshops were conducted to bring the industry up to speed on the SLE. There were opportunities for completed R&D projects to be showcased to the industry partners to collaborate and take up the technology. More than 20,000 participants have attended our events. Site visits were organized to share the best practices by some of our forerunners in the built environment and outreach efforts through our periodic publications. Next. Okay, next. So how can we help? To achieve these targets, BCA adopts a systemic approach to drive R&I within the industry, from formulation of roadmaps to successive stages of R&D, providing test bidding platforms such as the BCA Skylab, and to the establishment of standards such as mandatory requirements under Green Mark to drive adoption. Next. Which brings me to the GBIC, which is an integrated RD&D program to drive innovation of green building technologies, including SLE technologies. It was launched in 2014 and funded by the National Research Foundation. It covers R&D, testing, demonstration, knowledge sharing, and stakeholder engagement. It will help to drive SLE by accelerating the adoption of promising building energy efficient technologies and solutions in actual projects. So far, the GBIC has awarded more than 30 R&D and demonstration building projects. Next. For R&D, the GBIC focuses on industry-driven research and innovation centered around technologies in the SLE Tech Roadmap to develop practical and cost-effective solutions that can push technology boundary beyond the current best-in-class performance by 20% or more. Examples of previous GBIC Innovation Challenge calls include the Smart Building Technologies, where a total of 8 projects were awarded last year, and the recent Alternative Cooling Technologies in partnership with the Coolest SG Consortium, where 5 projects were awarded. Next. Supporting our out-of-lab test bidding, the BCA Skylab plays a critical role to help validate the performance of technologies in real-world conditions. Modeled after the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, the Skylab was launched in 2016 as an advanced outdoor test facility for green building technologies in the tropics. Sitting on a rotatable platform, the Skylab consists of 2 test cells, a reference cell which is fitted out with Green Mark Platinum standard technologies, and a test cell where the technologies will be tested. The Skylab can be rotated according to the building's orientation to test the technology performance. More than 200 sensors covering various aspects of energy and IEQ provide a host of data that is used to analyze the technology performance. Next. To help these technologies move up the TRL scale or technology readiness level, the GBIC demo was put together to encourage building owners and developers to demonstrate innovative energy efficient technologies in actual buildings. Through the successful demonstration, these technologies will be replicated, scaled up and adopted, and eventually go overseas. Such demonstrations will also help us in our policy formulation, such as raising the baseline, for example, mainstreaming SLE with the help of innovative and validated technologies, and also introducing of annexes on specific technologies in the Green Mark schemes, which will score additional points if implemented. Most importantly, these demonstrations will provide useful data for setting of new benchmarks to help raise the standard within the built environment. Next. To promote and bring innovations closer to market adoption, the GBIC demo supports large-scale pioneering of promising energy-efficient technologies in actual buildings to validate the performance of the demonstrated technologies in actual buildings. These promising technologies could include completed R&D projects from our universities or research institutions, or emerging technologies from industry that have yet to see wider adoption in Singapore, to be pioneered in developers' buildings to showcase practical and replicable solutions. By integrating these technologies, the demonstration project should achieve performance of at least 20% energy savings from Green Mark Platinum standards, or top 10% EUI for building typology. This performance is measured with data collected from an array of sensors and meters following international performance measurement and verification protocol standards. Next. In the next couple of slides, I'll be sharing some of the SLEB exemplary projects that have been demonstrated in Singapore, starting with the Zero Energy Building at the BCA Academy. This is Southeast Asia's first zero energy building, retrofitted from a MEP workshop, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing workshop. Repurposed as an office and institutional building, the Zero Energy Building adopted more than 30 technologies to reduce the energy demand and generate renewable energy via solar PV. Some of these technologies have seen commercial adoption, such as the underfloor air distribution system and the passive displacement cooling. With all these technologies integrated, the Zero Energy Building was able to achieve an exemplary energy performance of 83 kWh per meter square per year, which is about 67% of energy savings from the 2005 baseline. In the past 10 years, it has served as a demonstration and educational platform for the industry, academia, and the general public, receiving more than 35,000 visitors. Next. As mentioned earlier, with the launch of SLE program, the Zero Energy Building underwent an upgrade to remain relevant to the industry with the aim of achieving 73% energy savings. With further reduction of energy use intensity by leveraging on emerging technologies, we are able to push the Zero Energy Building to become positive energy building with 40% energy surplus production by end of 2020 by refreshing our solar PVs. This is achievable by replacing the existing solar PVs with new PV system that's capable of producing up to 200 kilowatt peak of solar on the rooftop. Some of the interesting technologies installed includes integrated cooling system with elevated aircon temperature and ceiling fans, as well as a smart desk system that provides personalized control of microclimate, both of which are the first in Singapore for office buildings. Next.
Well, could we come to the end of the presentation, please, because we're a bit over time.
Yep, okay, sure, no problem. Yeah, so the next couple of slides are some of the examples of SLE projects. I'll just run through quickly. What we have here is a mid-rise zero energy building in the city center, which is the SMU connection. It's a 5-story project that's able to achieve net zero with energy efficient technologies such as PDC as well as rooftop solar. Next. The Keppel Bay Tower project, which received a lot of media attention, was one of the first existing commercial buildings to take up the SLE challenge. And they have deployed 5 technologies that were solicited from a challenge call together with BCA. And they were able to achieve more than 20% energy savings from these technologies. Next. Lastly, we have the NUS SDE4, a net zero energy building. This by the School of Design and Environment at NUS. And this is a recipient of the Green Mark Incentive Scheme for Design Prototyping. And they were able to achieve net zero energy with use of various innovative technologies such as hybrid cooling and smart energy management systems. Next. So with the successful R&D demonstration projects, we also want to showcase all these successful projects with the wider public audience through our smart energy SLE Smart Hub portal, which is actually available online. You'll be able to see information on these projects. Next. There'll be a technology directory where building owners can actually source for technologies that have been demonstrated before, a smart advisor that will actually give building owners a high-level assessment of the SLE potential. And lastly, a building dashboard, which will actually provide information on various building types to be able for building owners to be able to benchmark against. Okay, next. So that'll be the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Noel. And I think it's pretty impressive, the richness of the examples that there are already. And the message is very clear. It can be done if you put your minds and your means to it. And I'd like to compare it to the situation how Singapore managed the water issue already and turning really what was a weakness into a real strength. And let us hold that thought when I'm turning to Vietnam. Ms. Kim Tor, she is the Senior Program Officer of the PEEP, the Building Energy Efficiency Program. and she's working out of the GIZ office in Vietnam. She acts as the technical project and policy advisor to the ministry construction, and in the past 20 years she held different positions providing technical assistance in the buildings and construction space, both at the national and the subnational level. And she reviewed the Vietnam nationally determined contribution roadmap for a low carbon climate resilient buildings and construction sector in Vietnam, Vision to 2050. And she also co-authored a number of key studies, including feasibility on green financing to energy efficient and low emission housing, and the non-monetary incentives to promote energy efficient and low emission housing in Vietnam. The floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. Good afternoon, sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martina, and allow me to express our sincere thanks to the organizer to allow us from Vietnam can have a voice in this important webinar, so we can share a little bit our very first step in develop our Vietnamese NDC building and construction roadmap. Actually, we following the regional roadmap for building and construction in Asia developed by the GlobalABC, and we try to get the concept and methodology understood by the government officers as well, so getting them on board to see what can be applicable in Vietnam and what can be really benefited Vietnamese people. And next please. So actually a little bit, just one slide about our market. Vietnam with about approaching 100 million population now. So, but also in the last 10 years, our urbanization is going pretty rapid, so that approaching 40% of our population living in all of the urban area throughout the country. We have more than 800 cities in different grades. The big one, but maximum, not like in India, the biggest one is approaching 10 million person, but down to normal city within the 1 million to 5 million people, and then lower than 1 million people. So all of those we categorize like urban development, and go alongside with that is the booming of construction of residential and non-residential buildings. So it's saying that from our building market, the new constructed building is really in place now. So what we are talking about today is to make the new constructed building right away green or energy efficient or low emission is really important, because those build up our urban infrastructure is next, at least in the next 50 years for those buildings that we are constructing today. So and then those construction booming go along with our GDP growth at about 5 or 6% in recent year, and even now under the pandemic circumstances, we still keep positive growing. So the market showing us the opportunity, but also a lot of challenge that we have to act now to make the low emission, low carbon building for our future urban infrastructure in term. Next, please. Yeah, so seeing those the circumstances, the government have very much awareness that we have to act now in many dimensions, that to make our growth need to be more green. So the Vietnam Green Growth Strategy and Action Plan for the next 10 years is now under revision. We have it for the last 10 years already. And now more action need to be done at the sectoral level, so that action can be really deployed at the sector. And then now we're talking about our construction sector. So the government now doing also amendment on our law on environmental protection, LEP, not LAP, sorry. And the government also revision of our construction law and the law on housing. And our efforts now in order to make use of the NDC building and construction roadmap is to try to incorporate those concepts into our law revision so that low carbon building can have a name, can have a terminology into our law text, the body text of the law, so it can be really put it into effect rather than only study or research or the demonstration. We want program to be happen in this country. And in order to do so, the Ministry of Construction just in last month have already issued the action plan on implementation of Paris Agreement within the building sector. The first one in the country, why the government still put it on the umbrella of the Ministry of Natural Resource Environment. The building sector have already make itself action plan for implement the Paris Agreement. So on this basis, we have a good legal background to develop our NDC building roadmap, following the regional roadmap for Asia that we are talking about today. So in a lower down at the technical level, based on our current energy efficient building code 2017, the government also have a plan to revise it by 2021-22 after 5 years of implementation to make it more applicable and a little bit more strict so that our building can be better in energy efficient performance, and then accompany with that will lead to lower emission buildings. So also last year the government already amended the apartment code. So any newly constructed apartment building need to be compliant with our current energy efficient building codes. So those things put us in a good position and good timing to formulate the NDC building roadmap, building and construction roadmap for Vietnam, following the regional roadmap for Asia. Yeah, and at the lower level, at the municipality government and the local government, the green urban development area is developed, and then the concept of ecological and smart city for the urban environmental management also be introducing in Vietnam. Next slide, please. Yeah, based on all of what the effort from government, we try to identify what is needed, what is missing. So the policy is there, but then the means for implement the code is still need to be improved, need to be consolidated, so we can have more strength enforcement of the code. For example, now we need some MRV system so that we can see whether the building is compliant or not, or what measure can be applied to give more incentive to the investor who go for the decision to make to invest in green building or energy efficient high performance building, or even further to the net zero emission building. So, and also in the policy way, the NDC is now built up for the entire economy, but does not say specifically for construction and building sector. We are hiding under the category of energy user, together with transport, together with agriculture and all other sectors that we are all energy user. So the way we make a separate NDC building construction roadmap, we have a little bit long way to persuade the government that whether we should have the sectoral NDC roadmap separately from the overall entire economy NDC roadmap as committed by the government to the international UNFCCC. Yeah, and on the knowledge, we sure compared to the what what our earlier presenter from Singapore saying that we have a long way to learn from your experience just from Singapore for green mark certification, or the LEED or the BREEAM certification from England, all of that. At least now we can say we know. 5 years ago, we don't know about those rating system, but now we know. That's good. After 5 years, so now the government on the one hand make a minimum requirement on compliance to our energy efficiency building code, but on the higher level, encouraging all of the investors to go for whatever the green building certification and rating system like a green mark or LEED or BREEAM or other from other country, whoever can really measure or stated about how much energy could be saved and other criteria to be certified as a green buildings or green housing. And one more missing is the financing, a big challenge. And because people talk about incremental costs, but also not only incremental costs for energy efficient and low emission, but also the initial costs as well. So under the PEEP, Vietnam, we are started to formulate and then join hands with the Ministry of Construction and State Bank of Vietnam, try to propose the very first green housing program to mobilize, to have access to the green financing and green bond at the range of about 200 million euro for the very first green housing program in Vietnam. Yeah, and next slide, please. Yeah, so what we in terms of the contribution to the commitment that government of Vietnam made to the international on the NDC, that we will try to contribute from the building sector and construction sector so that the government really can achieve it. It could not be done without construction and building sector. Yeah, as you can see the number on the slide. Next, please. Yeah, so for our NDC building roadmap approach, this one is a very highly appreciate that the regional roadmap already provide us a good approach and methodology so that we can see that and present it to the government. And the Ministry of Construction really appreciates the comprehensive approach that presented in the regional roadmap, that we touching on all of the 8 let's say pillar of the construction sector: urban planning and development, and the newly constructed building, and slightly on the building retrofit, the wickets of our residential building now. Retrofit have a big challenge in Vietnam as well, but also in building operation, and then the use of all of the energy efficient building system and also smart building system. And the material is appreciated that Vietnamese are doing a good job on the low energy embodied materials. We did that job in the last 20 years a lot for the production of the building material, including bricks, roofing tile, and then facing tile, and all of those things. And that work is a good work done by the government of Vietnam in the last 20 years for the low emission or low energy embodied material for building sector. On the resilient, we have a lot to learn, very much from Japanese or Filipino friends, that since our climate so far, and we are endowed with a better climate, not much extreme until so far, that the building sector really need to learn how to improve or how to more strengthen our standards so that our building can be more resilient to the unexpected climate extreme that our Filipino or Japanese and other friends be more experienced with that. We are less experienced with that, and we are very much looking forward to learn from how to make our building more resilient. by improving, lifting up our standard and other things that we need to learn also on operation. And the last point is make use of the own type of clean energy sources for building sector, like solar on the roof or the solar water heating, and very much also on make use of clean energy for all of the cooling, space cooling system, and also not only space cooling but also cooling chain for our other industry as well. The building on that, like the cooling chain. Yeah. Next, please.
If you could kindly come to the end of your presentation as well, because we're out of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that is the last slide on our roadmap development. We started it last year in September, and then now until now, November 20, we will come up with some technical stakeholder to get finalize our draft, and then from next year we can initiate the political adoption of the NDC roadmap following the regional roadmap. And then all of the ministry down here we present when we have a voice or a feedback on our process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Val, to both our speakers. You can all see that there is a wealth of experience out there already, which is pretty amazing. And we've only been scratching the surface in this. We wanted to have a panel discussion, but we're pretty much at the end of the time. But I want to give really one quick question to each of the speakers, and I would like to ask for very short answers as well. And we'll be rejoined by Maxine, and there is one question to her, and I'll start with that. And that is the documents of the roadmaps. They are so rich and large, not yet specific to any country, but for a region. What would you recommend as the most useful feature for any individual country? And obviously, we've now seen as well from Kim how you can bring it, well, what will be done with the ASEAN region, so sub-regional level, and then what we've seen is being done in a country at the national level. But would you have any recommendation as to what is the most useful feature?
Thanks, Martina. So this is one of the questions that we did explore with in our stakeholder consultations, and it was interesting to see that different people found different aspects of them interesting. So some people really valued the examples from different countries, so sort of the best practice examples, case studies. Some people valued more the sort of the prioritization and the sort of menu of options of policies and technology. Not all of them are going to be as relevant in all of the places, but at least it serves as a sort of menu for countries to then identify, pick which ones are most appropriate and develop the how to implement them strategy in more detail. And then the other aspect, I think, that people did find valuable is the sort of breakdown of the long-term vision into 10-year, more short-term, medium-term, and long-term steps. So I think those are the sort of the three highlights, I think, and it's really great to see that that the structure has been taken forward in the Vietnam one as well. I think that. That's also something that has been really appreciated because the sector is so large and has so many facets. So maintaining that structure is also a good way to make sure that all of the bases are covered, basically. So I'll end it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Maxine. And we heard in both contributions from the national level the importance of regulation and what is, I mean, first of all, setting a target and then coming to regulation. We pointed out, we heard that implementation is not always an easy one. And in the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, we actually put together a document of cost-benefit analysis of policy measures. And clearly the energy building codes came out really on top. They're hard to move. but there are a way of really getting things to scale. And what was found is it's not only putting into place the code itself, but it's the policy packages that go with it. And there is a question from the audience that fits very well with that. And that's the lack of incentive mechanism and affordable funding to supporting the zero energy technology appears as the significant barrier for building owner investor to pursue the roadmap. How could this be addressed? And maybe I give the same question to both of you, to Noel and Kim. So floor is yours. Maybe ladies first. Kim.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you are right. Yeah, as I just mentioned that even the government will, I mean, political will is there. The government want to go ahead, and they make everything as possible, like the code, the regulation, revision of the law. But going down to on the ground, it is money. It is a willingness to pay for incremental cost, and then also the awareness to accept the new concept of green building or low emission building, or pay for the clean energy. All of those things need to be go, and then as in Vietnam we also say money first. Okay, where the money to do it, even we wish to. So mobilizing of the financial fund in Vietnam is now can go into green bond, that the State Bank of Vietnam already opened the way for green bond to be legalized, not to be legalized, to be in place, that the local banks or financial institution can start issuing the green bond. But where the green bond can be applicable to the real estate or housing or not is another question, because it really is easily to come to bubble, another thing. So now then it need to be go hands in hand with the benefit from green and low emission, so that though the decision can be made on the mobilizing of green bond. Then we try thinking about supporting also from other green financing, like from GCF or from a bilateral government like AFD. And now we are approaching AFD for the very first 200 million euro, so that the first low emission housing program can be really announced in Vietnam, so that to stimulate the market, supply side 20% and demand side 80%. So our buyer can really say, I want a greenhouse to buy. Then the investor saying, yes, okay, we are going to construct for you now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. Noel, well, you already have a program, right, that helps providing some funds. So maybe you want to talk about that, but feel free to take the question as well as a broader one.
Definitely. So the funding program that we have in the GBIC really incentivizes risk-taking for building owners to actually demonstrate these technologies, especially the innovative emerging technologies. Otherwise, if it's left to the industry, you would probably see these technologies just left on the shelf. So our purpose is really to bring these technologies out of the lab and provide an opportunity for the building owners to get them tested. And we work closely with building developers, mainly because they have a whole slew of building portfolio, and they can actually replicate these technologies if it's successful to the rest of their buildings. So that was actually the whole objective of developing this GBIC demonstration program. But again, we also do see that there are also very ambitious developers. For example, SIEW was one of them. And also recently we received a couple of also interest from other building owners and developers who are very keen to explore net zero without any funding. And we are very happy to hear that the industry is actually moving even without incentives. Of course, there are also other ways of financing through green financing, as earlier mentioned. But I think what is important is for building owners to actually see the potential of net zero energy, and to actually see how it can actually help them with the bottom line at the end of the day. I think that is the important part that building owners and developers will need to have a look at.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we talked a lot about the financial incentives, and now you just said, well, they will do it. I mean, there is an interest to do it anyhow. So it's not only contingent on funding, and there's obviously those non-financial incentives as well.
Yes.
And I think Singapore has had great experience with that as well. Maybe I won't take it away and let you talk about it.
Yeah,
So
I think yeah. So what's important is the recognition to be the first in the industry. I think that's what building developers are all competing to achieve. To be one up on the other, and we are very happy to actually see the industry moving in this direction. And as I mentioned earlier on, we had the Green Mark SLE certification that was launched last year, and we actually had about 17 of them who actually committed to actually achieve this SLE target, even without a building project in the first place. So you can see that there's a lot of excitement, a lot of ambition from the building developers to actually go with us and to actually help us in pushing for super low energy buildings.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And maybe just quickly turning back to Kim, you did a whole study on the non-financial incentives. Is there anything you'd like to add on that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I just mentioned about money, but the money is not everything, because sometimes actually the market does not have a lot of money, but they need to find a good project to really have a confidence to invest in, especially in the real estate. So so we have a good position that we try to call for energy efficient. That means saving on the one hand, and then also the investor interested in the sense that we can call for the more customer to buy their real estate, rather than the little money that put into their pocket. So the non-incentive one, we did a full study with the Ministry of Construction to really review the whole process, that from the pocket of money to the construction side to until the day they announce the green housing is available to the market, how much of the challenge and barrier that makes investors sometimes disappointed. To review all of those process, the administrative procedure, the process for applying construction permit, and then all of other things related to the land licensing and then land clearance and all of those things. And even the last step is how to operate the building so that the tenant and the occupant can be happy to say that I want a green flat, a green apartment. So that makes the market demand strong enough to move the whole sector, to move the whole market. So we can share that in non-monetary or non-financial incentive study with you. We have the final draft already into English, because it's all written by Vietnamese, by all of the people working with the ministry and the subordinated department. And then we're happy to share with you that study. Yeah, but that is the context of Vietnam.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there will be a lot of interest for that as well amongst the participants. Maybe one last opportunity for Maxine, turning to you. And obviously, finance, for example, was one of the cross-cutting chapters in the roadmap as well. If you want to highlight anything out of that.
Thank you. Yes, so we did show some examples of particular financial mechanisms, but I think I really agree with the points that have been mentioned in terms of creating the market demand for these green buildings. And for that, information is really critical: data, evidence, robust rating systems to give confidence both to the consumers and to the banks that the savings will actually the owners will actually benefit from savings. And I think that's an area that maybe would perhaps be easier to address because it's about information, it's also about narratives and a strong evidence base for the benefits to the actual consumer. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Maxine. We've been running over a little bit in time, but I think it was well worth getting a bit more out of the wealth of experience that has been captured in our panel here. Now, for the second part, I'll hand over. First, I thank our panelists. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. And for the second part, I will hand over to Emily McCoulter from the IEA, and she manages there the energy efficiency in emerging economies program in Southeast Asia. So, Emily, and apologies for the delay.
No problems, Martina, and thank you very much. It was, yeah, a very worthwhile discussion, so I don't mind things going over. But good afternoon, everyone. As Martina mentioned, my name is Emily McQuilter, and I work for the Energy Efficiency Division of the International Energy Agency. And I specifically work in this region, providing policy advice and working on project implementation with governments. So before I begin my short presentation, on some upcoming work that we're doing, I would like to thank you for all attending this roundtable this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, and it was great to hear, it's great to have you all here, and to all the speakers, I thank you again for a great discussion. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity in this region, and it's great to hear people doing some amazing work. So today I'm going to briefly talk about a new project that a few people have mentioned this afternoon that we're just starting. We're going to be working closely with the ASEAN community to really try and build on the work of Martina and Maxine's work that they've done under the GlobalABC Building Construction Roadmap for Asia. And we're going to really take a deep dive into this work and work on a regional roadmap for the ASEAN, and yeah, more of a deep dive into this topic. So I also, next slide, please. So last year we also did some work with the Thai government on looking at cooling in the region. And so the report explored the expected rise in demand in energy consumption, peak electricity, and CO2 emissions by 2040. And it set out some alternative scenarios. And this was a report that was submitted to the ASEAN ministers for approval. And it's something that we really want to build on this year going forward and take a deeper look. So we'll also, as well as developing the buildings roadmap, we'll also be looking at cooling. Next slide, please. So over the next 12 months, we'll be calling out to all of you to get in contact with us to share your knowledge and experience with us as we dive into the road mapping process. As we mentioned, we'll be developing a roadmap for energy efficient buildings and construction for the ASEAN region and a specific roadmap on space cooling. We'll run a series of webinars on both topics, so please keep an eye out for those. We'd really love to have you involved. And something that's really important to us is stakeholder consultation. So getting your opinion and your experience in making these documents as useful as possible is our, I guess, our #1 goal. Next slide, please. So we have a very tight time frame to deliver these work. We have 1 year to do this, so we're really keen to get your thoughts. But just to say that in 2019, in cooling, we produced the Future of Cooling report that I mentioned and presented these results to the ASEAN community. And this year we've been working, looking at digital tools to really take a deep dive into data collection. So we worked with a company called Big2Great in Denmark, who use web scraping to scrape websites for information. So we collected some data particularly from Indonesia, so that we could get a better understanding of particularly the air conditioning and refrigeration market in Indonesia. And we also worked with a company called Premise, who uses crowdsourcing app to ask consumers to collect information about products available in the market. And we did this study in Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. And this gave us a wealth of new data that we didn't have before, and we're currently presenting that data back to governments. So this work really ties into and the development of our new cooling roadmap. Next slide, please. As Maxine mentioned, we'll also, well, as we're talking about today, we're releasing the, Maxine's been working on the Global Alliance and Construction Building Roadmap for Asia. And that was, spent a lot of time working on that and doing a lot of stakeholder consultation. And as Maxine mentioned, we had a workshop in Singapore. And this year, going forward, we'll be starting the work on the ASEAN roadmap. Next slide, please. So my presentation was only very brief this morning, but I just wanted to give you an overview of what we're doing going forward from now to the end of next year. I'd really encourage you to reach out to me or any of the colleagues on the call today to share your experiences and knowledge, and we'd really like to include you in any stakeholder consultations we have going forward. So that's all I wanted to say, but now I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Ian Hamilton, who is an associate professor at UCL Energy Institute at the University College of London in the UK, and he'll be running our last session of the day. And this is where we wanted to hear more from you, our audience, through our poll questions. And we'll also be engaging with our speakers further, but this session is really focused on discussing the key challenges emerging from the region under the global health pandemic and ways in which policy actions from governments and global organizations can help to build back stronger with a more sustainable and resilient building stock in the future. So Ian, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you, everybody. I appreciate joining and being a part of this conversation. So I want to take the opportunity, I think that as a part of what we're discussing and the implications of the current pandemic around how we can, as Emily suggested, use this as a moment to reframe and reflect on what actions are needed to both support the economic and social recovery alongside the reality of needing to tackle the long-term challenges of climate change. So in this session, what we wanted to do, and I've encouraged you in the chat to you can input on the polls, which we'll come to in just a moment, but to have a start on that conversation around what other governments are doing around not only the region, but globally in taking actions around building energy efficiency and carbon emission reduction in their COVID strategies. So if we go to the next slide, we have a few examples of this. So as I said before, there's a converging crisis in terms of climate change and the pandemic. And the realities are that as governments put forward in economic plans of recovery, this is the moment, as I said, where you can reframe this around how we can improve built environments. So the next slide. With the recent sharing of the Japanese of the I think it's the UNFCCC climate dialogues, this Redesign 2020 platform for Redesign 2020 went through and collected a lot of the statements around recovery and policies and different actions that are being taken by countries around the world. And what they've done is a really nice job of illustrating by sector whether they are as a response or recovery or redesign in terms of, say, a bigger infrastructural or structural change to how they are focused on tackling climate change. So I obviously would like to highlight that Singapore have certainly looked to do this in their various different ways. An example of these here. So co-creation of the Singapore Green Building Master Plan with industry and community. And so I think this is a good example of engagement around how COVID-19 recovery can be integrated into a more master planning and long-term vision approach to how the state will develop over time. And another example being in Indonesia, where the focus of announcing around how to support energy efficiency in buildings, and in particular offices and commercial buildings, And I think these are the sorts of things which are really going to be necessary going forward, particularly given the implications around how we can access and make use of building spaces again safely in the future. Just go to the next slide as well. Some outside of the region examples from the platform include, for example, the United Kingdom, where announcements around investment in supporting advanced new building technologies as a way of being able to reduce costs and also manage carbon emissions within the industry has been announced. There's been a number of various announcements from the UK government on these types of issues. And then also another example being for Denmark around how they've integrated with agreements on how to renovate the building stock such that it supports both, obviously, the health implications of COVID in terms of being able to make safe environments, but also the long-term benefit of the residents in these homes. So what we've done now is we've put together a few questions, and I'll certainly comment on these along with my colleagues. I believe Maxine and Noel will help me out here alongside questions that are coming from the audience, which we'll do. And just to remind you, if in the session as you're watching, under the live discussion, under the polls, you can see after you've submitted a response to the poll, you can see where the percentage of responses have gone. So just to again encourage you to do that, because it's quite a helpful way of being able to see what your colleagues and others joining the session are suggesting on these. So if we go to the next slide. The first, right, just and the next slide. So the first question that we wanted to tackle was really your understanding of across the region, where have announcements around stimulus that pertain to energy efficiency been focused around, and the options we were asking for you to offer were whether it was building envelopes or heating systems, cooling systems, lighting, appliance equipment, or building management systems. And from the poll response, what we're finding is there's been quite a bit of announcement around cooling systems, and I think that you saw that being remarked on by Noel as well as Kim and the speaker from the ACE, who make the point around the long-term demands being around cooling. And the other is another, that was 40% on the cooling system, and then 23% are suggesting that building management systems are another focus area. So I'm not sure whether any of my colleagues have also seen announcements that are focused in these areas, but I think it's obviously quite an important issue around cooling systems going forward, around how stimulus might be able to support them. Does anybody want to add a remark on this?
Yep. Hi, Noel here. Yeah. So I'd like to also emphasize what Minister Chan Chun Sing shared at the opening of SIEW about the need to actually explore various cooling technologies to actually improve the energy efficiency. But at the same time, with the COVID-19 experience, we also realized that there are opportunities for us to relook at the way buildings are being designed, to actually increase and explore ventilation, improving the ventilation for buildings. And that will actually help also to bring down the overall energy consumption for buildings. So I think it has, while it has also created a pandemic, but it has also at the same time created opportunities for us to relook at the way we design buildings.
Thanks, Noel. I think it's interesting that with the guidance that are coming out from, say, ASHRAE and SIBSI and other building management associations, that ultimately the use of ventilation as a way of being able to mitigate against, obviously, transmission of disease such as COVID, as well as to create healthier indoor environments in any case. The energy implications of that are potentially quite substantial in running these systems with a lot of fresh outdoor air intake as compared to recirculation, which is what so many of these systems are designed to do. And I think that the focus with, in particular, cooling, and as you've said, being able to reconsider how these are being designed such that it supports fresh air quality indoors, and at the same time not affecting or undermining the performance around cooling. And I think that's going to be a real challenge, particularly for refurbishment in a lot of these large, cool buildings going forward.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. You're right on that. But moving forward for new building projects, I think that emphasis would then be, can we leverage on natural ventilation to actually increase natural ventilation as compared to the use of active cooling systems?
Yeah. Thanks very much. So I appreciate that comment. And if we go to the next question, and what we were asking there is, with this slide, aside from the obvious pandemic and economic focus, what are the other benefits that have been included in these announcements? And I think here the interesting elements are, very early on in the pandemic, a lot of the energy policies that were being presented as a way of response had quite a lot to do with being able to maintain affordability, and very rightly the implications around the lockdowns and the like, which are of course kind of representing themselves in all sorts of different ways across the world. But then going forward, there's been a lot more focus on how energy efficiency and, again, stimulus activities can be coincident with other benefits, other co-benefits that we might expect. And in the announcements to date, looking at the poll questions and respondents to this, the majority have been around carbon emission reduction, with 43% suggesting that that was a primary area of announcement. And then the next being building related health and well-being. And I think this is actually quite telling, that obviously that with the pandemic response, that's a primary concern, but this understanding of the synergy that has in the longer term around the use of the space in a healthy way. And particularly, I think also, given, as others have suggested, that the familiarity now with our homes as both work and personal spaces have really coincided, and I think there's a real recognition of being able to, I hope, consider in the design of buildings going forward, what that really means as a more holistic, well-being design, and not simply just metrics around air quality. So I think that's a really interesting part of how these announcements, not only looking at carbon emission reduction, but also looking to build in more healthy environments within our building designs. I welcome any comments from my panelists or colleagues on that.
I'd have a quick thing to add, if I may.
Yes, please, Maxine.
I think also it hasn't shown up so much on the poll, but I think the air quality improvements is also quite a strong driver. I think many cities have seen a drastic increase in air quality with the lockdowns, and with, I know it's not just buildings, but with limited transport and traffic. I know that several places, for example, in New Delhi, people were able to see views of the Himalayas that they were not able to see before, and that's really given a motivation for holding on to that kind of benefit, and it's given people a snapshot of what could be possible with better planning of cities. So it's a bit more holistic than just the buildings, but I think that was quite a striking piece of evidence that some of the most polluted cities have actually been able to witness.
Thanks, Maxine. If we go to the next question, and then I note that there's also a question from the audience, which I'll respond to as well in a moment. So this is a question to those of you who are attending and listening around which of the following actions would you say have the biggest short-term benefit to address health and economic crisis. So really this was about saying, what are governments, what are cities, what are organizations could do today that are likely to have the biggest short-term benefit in terms of energy efficiency for buildings. And so looking at the poll responses, is perhaps a little bit less than the majority, and it's more spread across these different categories, but the number one was around accelerate actions on building retrofits. And I think that's a very clear way of which we can institute change for the better today. I think there's of course challenges around how workers can access buildings safely, and there's of course a resistance towards having people come in and work on buildings of their personal homes. But I think where a lot of businesses might be looking at upgrades to systems that they had otherwise put off, or seeing now the opportunity to do that because of, for example, stimulus opportunities for them to make use of funding that wouldn't otherwise been available. The other two being a prioritization of urban planning and development, and I think that's really important to understand. One of the things that I noted when I was working in London in the engineering and design world in the last recession was the interest in beginning to put in place a lot of the plans for when things would be better times. And I think that's a really prescient moment now to consider how the long-term designs today can be better affected. And then the other area that has been responded to is to develop and adopt energy efficient operation and maintenance standards. And of course, as Noel and I were remarking earlier, the importance of building operations is really key here. And I think being able to recommission and retune a lot of the existing building systems, and then being able to look for opportunities where either digital systems or simply better maintenance methods could be applied to ensure that the buildings achieve their appropriate performance levels. And maybe I'll just quickly step to the next question because they're related, and then we can pick up on any remarks from the group, which is, what are the benefits for the longer term? And here the question again is, what actions could be used over the longer term? Again, the same listing. And what I think is interesting here, looking at the poll results, is the prioritization of new building energy codes and standards as being the number one identified element. This, I think, is a very clear signal that, although 33%, because there's a second one around maintenance and adoption of standards on performance, is that with the use of codes and standards being developed and applied today, we know that they have such a long-term legacy. And I think that the reality is that the buildings we occupy are an example of that. But they can, of course, with refurbishment be improved on. And I think that's, again, a key trick here, is that there's new building energy codes and standards. And then there's also ways in which one can take consequential improvements to existing buildings, when you begin to trigger a higher standard because of the amount of refurbishment that's going forward. So I think those are really interesting areas. Just also to say that areas such as accelerating access to clean energy, and that's incredibly important. And I think this is where the ability to invest in long-term infrastructure around building integrated renewables, but also obviously grid level renewables for the built environment is really important around these type of stimulus actions, especially for the longer term. So I just invite my colleagues, if they wanted to remark on any of those two related questions, the short-term area of benefit that looks at accelerating retrofit actions, and then the longer term around prioritizing building energy codes and standards.
Maybe can I join here? I think in case of Vietnam, the long-term one is the long-term benefit normally first looked at by the government, certainly for the people, but then I think in our case, the A would be prioritize of sustainable urban planning and development in Vietnam case is very much important now. The government even revise the law on planning because the wrong planning will make have a lot of consequence later on that very difficult to correct, especially in the very high pace of urbanization. Yeah, and agree with you that the priority of new building and energy code and standard is important as well. We have the codes, but the accompanying, I mean the in place of the accompanying standard is also important. So agree with you on that as well. Yeah, but also because we become a vulnerable country to the climate change, so we also pick up the app building in resilience for the community. Yeah, and for the building itself. Otherwise, we would not have a very sustainable future for our whole building stock. Imagine one storm coming and how many % of existing building will be collapsed if we don't really take care of the resilient feature of the building from today.
Yeah, no, that's an incredibly important point, and that's where it's interesting that I think there's probably going to be, you know, debate around, you know, the need to really focus on elements of long-term developments and how they, of course, coincide with each other. You know, we frame this question as which could be the most important, but we recognize that they're all there. In the last question, and I think that just as we're wrapping up, I wanted to remark as well on the final one, the last question around areas of innovation and research and innovation. And I think this is where the built environment tends to be quite slow at being able to you know, address kind of novelty and new methods of doing things. And I think this is where Noel and his presentation around, you know, the new energy lab in Singapore was a really great example of that, being able to give a place for companies to come in and you know, test out new technologies. And so the question really was focused on, you know, where do we see these things coming forward the next year, the most innovative actions? And we just offered 3, and ideally we would have had a way for you to input, you know, where you saw that coming from. But the majority looks to suggest that on-site digital construction technologies are going to be a real key of innovation going forward for the future. And I think that's a really interesting, I suppose it makes a lot of sense around how these things come together. And then of course, modular building techniques. But I'm noted that we're going to be running out of time, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for contributing to these poll questions. I hope you found them interesting, and I appreciate also from my colleagues who commented on the very different findings. So I'll wrap up and send it back over to Martina.
Thank you so much, Ian. Super rich, super interesting. We had a wonderful panel. I would like to thank all our speakers, as well as the organizing team in the back, having made it possible to have this event. And I won't be summarizing everything, but just a few highlights. And I think the first is really we brought home that message of the importance of energy efficiency in buildings, and that goes for both new and existing. The highlight of cooling as a key rising area of interest, with a focus on the appliances, but also what can be done at the building level and at the urban level. And we didn't go as much into detail on the nature-based solutions, but it came out of the presentation by Singapore. And I think particularly in that region where the climatic conditions are often such that there is a real possibility to build those in. So that we can reduce the cooling demand in the first place, then reduce at the energy levels of the appliances, and then go for renewables for the remaining bit that cannot be reduced. So there's a hierarchy in this. The second point that came out very clearly is that a lot is happening already. And if you really put your mind and your means to it, you can do it. It starts with setting a good target and an ambitious target. Regulation has been seen as really important, from codes to standards to certification. And here again, not only for new buildings, but also for existing buildings, but it needs to be complemented by the right enabling packages. And that has a strong emphasis as well on finance. There's the power of demonstration. Showing what can be done is really critical for people to make it, to make them want it and to roll it out. There is a struggle still with implementation, both in terms of capacity and really the enforcement side of things. Here, data has been really highlighted as critical to help with MRV, but data also for finance. Again, we've seen the finance packages are coming forward with an emphasis on green bonds, for example, but there's also the non-financial incentives that can be used much more. And here there was an emphasis on the interest of the private sector and using their sense for competition. So using this idea of race to the top for a race to zero carbon is critical. And the roadmaps can be a real good means to getting there as well, to bring together the stakeholders by having this process, but also by showing all these different options with the short, the medium, and the longer term targets. We said again how important the data is for getting all this done. And my last point to end with it is this connection between buildings, well, housing and energy, the energy agenda and health. And we heard quite a bit about that. And again, here the highlight of the importance of particularly building renovation as part of recovery packages. And I think I've rushed through this, but we have come to the end. And again, thank you to everybody, and particularly as well for your very engaged contributions, both through the polls and the questions that came through. Thank you very much.